Did you encounter any corpses?
Yep, seen a few dead bodies in prison. Sounds very callous, that. It's not at all. The one lad found on healthcare, not hanging so much as he'd clotheslined himself. By that I mean, when I found him, we had this prisoner. He'd come into prison, been very disruptive, and ended up in a segregation unit, solitary, the shoe or whatever. And he'd gone out to hospital because he thought possibly he was ill. Shit everywhere in the cell. And he was Polish, so there was a language problem. So he went to hospital. He was on a bed watch, and I think he was on a 6-officer bed watch. Normally, a bed watch is where a prisoner goes out for medical attention and might well stop in a hospital. Usually, it will be in a room separate to other people, but you could be on a ward, and depending on their security risk, for instance, somebody who got 2 weeks to go might be a 2-officer. Somebody extremely violent could any number of officers, up to 12 officers. So this guy is on a bed watch, I think 6-officer bed watch. He's disruptive, he's trying to smear shit on officers, he's trying to throw shit at nurses, violent tendencies. Very difficult situation, that, because you are in a public place. So he came back into prison and he ended up on healthcare. He was very difficult to manage. There was a language barrier, but he was very unpredictable, very hostile, very aggressive. Anyway, he'd been on there 3-4 months, something like that. He was due in court. The reason he'd come back to us from court, his offence was carrying a knife. He would have probably served 3 months and been released. But because of his lack of cooperation in court, even though I had an interpreter, the judge sent him back to prison. Anyway, no one suspected that he was at any risk of harming himself, suicide or anything like that. No special measures other than he was on an unlock protocol. I'm sure you have these in America. Basically, the segregation in healthcare, you have a protocol. There's always a minimum of 2 staff to open anyone up. But he was on a 3-officer unlock. So in order to get him out so he could collect his meal, you need to have 3 staff. So if you only had 2 staff, you'd have to take the meal to him. Anyway, I went this particular morning and he'd clotheslined himself.
What do you mean by that?
What he'd done, he'd tied a shoelace. There were barred windows in healthcare. They had perspex, so they were like 4 or 5 bars across the window, square bars, and perspex in between them, as it were. So he tied a shoelace like a clothesline from each of the end bars, and he'd leant against it, pushed against it. Now, this could have been death by stupidity. Again, no disrespect there. You know, it weren't round his neck. He hadn't dropped and hung himself. He could have possibly been testing things. And I think it's vagal nerve or something. I think at his coroner's report, he caught that vagal nerve. And if you do catch that, medical persons, please forgive me if I ain't got the name right, then you would pass out.
Puts you to sleep.
Puts to sleep. So he was in a position like a ski jumper when he leaves a jump. He was leant forward. You know, his feet were flat to the floor. He was leant forward. He got his arms down by his side and his jaw was fully extended. It was horrendous. The thing about this prisoner I forgot to mention, I have never smelled anything like him in my life. His body odour was not of this world. From being in hospital to being in healthcare, I honestly never smelled anything like it, Shaun. We used to get him out as regularly as we could, bearing in mind he was difficult to deal with, shower him, and we'd have to put him in another cell and have clean clothes in there in order to clean that cell. The stench was horrendous. Anyway, he was stiff as a board, well dead. I got my mate, Debbie, give her a shout because she's my mate, and we got him down, commenced CPR, the nurse turned up, and here's the thing, right, he was dead, yeah, really dead, but we did CPR, that's what you do. A lot of people are just, you know, what are you fucking doing that for, he's dead, or whatever. That's what we started doing. The nursing staff didn't complain about that. The nurse who attended, who was called Hotel 1, that nurse attends all the incidents. No one complained. The stench was horrendous. It was probably, I described, the worst day of my prison career. And that's not just the dead body, it's how people behaved, how it was managed, again, which was nothing to do with the healthcare staff. It was not a good day. It affected me quite bad. However, nobody took any time off. We were all there next day at 6 o'clock. What I will say, interestingly enough, two guys separately who attended that incident. What happens in any British prison, private, public sector, if there is an incident like a death in custody, self-harming, a fight or anything, someone presses an alarm bell which alerts staff on other wings that there is an incident happening. So somebody pressed the bell on healthcare, so staff attended from other wings. Now, because it was death in custody and not a fight, people had come on, they'd look, see what was happening and leave that wing. So two lads separately, after they read the book, both messaged me and said, that day affected us. So they came on, they saw us working on him and they left. And they both went to another wing, I think it was G wing on the exercise yard. One of them says to the other, did you smell that smell? And he says, one of them were having a fag. One of them were physically sick, which made the other sick. And both of them said they couldn't get it out of their head for weeks. And they're two guys who have attended, seen the body and left. So there was two staff on there, one who was sent home. He was a young lad, he was an ex-squaddy, and you could see he was in physical shock. He was white. An SO come on, Kev, who was a really good guy, he was all about staff. Took him to one side, made sure he was home, made sure he got a lift home, looked after him. There was also a dog handler who at the time wasn't directly involved, but I spoke to him some months later. He sort of questioned me when I was coming into work and said, are you all right? And I said, yeah, I'm all right. What? He says, that incident. I says, has it bothered you? He says, I'm having nightmares. But, there was no aftercare, no nothing. So, but what was really bad, and it was one of the things that made it a bad day, the lad who was in shock was ridiculed by other staff who were there. They were taking the piss. This macho bollocks, it's just a fucking dead con. What's his fucking problem? Needs to get a set. And that just added to the woes for me. The incident itself's bad enough. Any death in custody will affect staff.
Yeah.
However, how people behave sometimes can make things much worse. What I will add, because again, I was criticised of, how I discussed and reported this incident. It was a good few months later, I actually attended coroner's court. And at this coroner's court was this lad's sister. So I was one of the last people on the stand at coroner's court, and the coroner said to me, we've got this young lady here, she's been here for 2 weeks now. Her brother's died in a British prison, and no one has explained to her yet why he was on an unlock, why he was on healthcare, and his behaviour. So it was my job to sort of explain to her, and I did talk like we're talking now. I was on a stand, coroner here, I did talk to her, and she had an interpreter, she understood some English, and I explained her brother's behaviour. And afterwards, the solicitor come up, the prison barrister, and said, she come to me and thanked me for what you'd said.
Yeah.
So it does affect us, and I do understand that there's also other people, families of prisoners that are going to be affected.